All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Best Foot Forward Summit 2024. I know a lot of you. I've seen a lot of your faces. I see a lot of faces that are new to me, and I'm always happy to do that. Happy to have that opportunity. So if you saw us here last year, thank you for coming back. And if you're new to the summit, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Patrick Panza. I'm the programs director for Bike Walk Central Florida. And Best Foot Forward is the program that we are here to celebrate today and to make some recognitions and to be here together as a partnership and as a coalition. We're all pointed toward the same goal. So our hope is today's meeting and event provides an opportunity for you all, for all of our coalition members and participants, to collaborate, to be inspired by one another and to inspire others, and to celebrate our successes and our momentum moving forward toward safety. Everyone here in this room plays a very vital and critical part in our mission to improve safety in Central Florida. We all know that. We're here to celebrate, we're here to recognize everyone, and we're here to provide some awards. We've got some activities planned for you today, and we encourage everyone to just keep an open mind, keep some conversation flowing, ask questions. Ask questions of people in arenas that you don't often get a chance to ask questions from. That's why we've brought everyone here today. So we really couldn't do this without the help of all of you as a program, but also as an event. We'd like to thank very specially a couple of our main sponsors today. Metroplan Orlando has always been a critical piece of this effort and helps us as Bike Walk Central Florida facilitate this program and continue moving things forward and continue moving that needle. So thank you very, very much. Thank you to our venue, our gracious hosts at the Center for Health and Wellbeing here. It's a beautiful building. We're back. We had such a great time here last year. We are back here again, and we hope that everyone feels very comfortable in this venue. And they are so great to us, and they're very, very helpful. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our catering provider, Nourish Coffee Bar and Kitchen, housed right here in the building. They've been very, very helpful for us, and everything is set up for us as well. So I hope you're enjoying it. So what we're going to be up to today, we've got our opening remarks that we're in right now, and I will provide you some additional information. We're going to have our speakers, and of course we have our keynote speaker present with us today. We're very, very excited for Dr. Rebecca Sanders. We will have a panel discussion following that. After the panel discussion, we're going to take a break around 10:20, all right? And then we will begin our breakout sessions and our activities. After that, we will do our awards, and then we'll be able to let you go on about your business today, hopefully having had a great time and learned something and participated as well. So before we get started, just a couple house cleaning items. If you need, the restrooms are directly across the hall out of the doors in the back of the room and slightly to the left. Water fountains as well. Please make sure that your cell phones are silenced at the moment. And again, we'll break at 10:20, so that'll be a nice little mid-event break for us all. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Osceola County Commissioner, Cheryl Grebe, and Chair of the Metroplan Orlando Board.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank all the Best Foot Forward crew for convening this gathering to discuss one of the biggest issues facing Central Florida, safety on our streets and roads. Today, we are focusing on the safety of our most vulnerable road users, who are people who are walking. It's wonderful to see everyone today gathered. We also have opened this part of the discussion of the summit to a live YouTube audience as part of our Vision Zero Safety Speaker Series. We need as many people as possible to help spread the word that traffic deaths and injuries in our region is an epidemic, and that we all have a part to play in ending this. As chair of Metroplan Orlando, I lead a board representing Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. We often discuss how we can encourage people to get out and walk, and more importantly, how we can ensure their safety when they do. One of my favorite things is when Operation Best Foot Forward comes down to my county and they look at some of our crosswalks and educate individuals on how that crosswalk is supposed to be handled. They combine with our sheriff or our police enforcement citations. Some tickets are given out that day. We do let folks know in advance that this is happening, but it's a great education. And it also, for me, as a commissioner, they invite me out, and it also allows me to see some of those areas that might need improvement. Some of it's as simple as new paint on the street. Some of it is, hey, we need a flashing sign here because this is just not a really good intersection. We need to bring more visibility to it. But thank you again for all that you do. For several years now, MetroPlan has had a robust program of promoting complete street projects as well, and that helps our roads safer for our users. In the past year, we have gone all out on safety. With the help of a $3.8 million federal grant, we launched Vision Zero Central Florida to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on our roads. The need is tremendous, and the statistics are staggering. Every week, 5 people die and another 35 are seriously injured. In 2022 alone, 197 pedestrians were killed or seriously injured in Central Florida. Vision Zero will develop action plans at the regional, county, and city levels to confront these challenges and bring about the change that is needed. We won't be satisfied until we make all those numbers zero. In the meantime, it's great to align our Vision Zero mission with the work of our partners at Best Foot Forward to talk about the ways to improve pedestrian safety in Central Florida, and hence a lot of why you're here today. In more than a decade of work in the region, the Best Foot Forward Coalition has shown the importance and effectiveness of collective action in working for change. And really, that's what it's all about. It's going to take the collective to make this happen. We all have a role, whether it's law enforcement, making sure that individuals are doing what they're supposed to be doing, our planners, our engineers, public works staff who work on those complete streets and make sure our infrastructure is safe, our education and outreach partners who raise awareness of pedestrian safety laws and teach people safer behaviors, our health partners for when those who are injured, they're there to take care of them. And of course, elected officials like myself and my fellow board members who can help guide the conversation and ensure that the resources are allocated to get the job done. So for whatever each of you is doing in advance to advance the safety in the region, I give you a heartfelt thank you. The work is important today, but not just for today, but for generations to come. And like I said, each of you have a role to play. And I've been asked before, is Vision Zero really attainable? I say yes, it is, but it's going to take every one of us in this room and beyond this room to make sure that it happens. And now I'd like to hand it over to Gary Hutman, our Executive Director of MetroPlan Orlando, who will talk a little more about our featured speaker today, who is also the second in our ongoing series of Vision Zero safety speakers. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Commissioner Grebe, for taking the time to be here this morning and for your comments. And good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone here. It seems like the year has gone by so fast. It seems like we were just here doing this same thing. But I also want to welcome those who are joining us on YouTube for the live stream, which is part of our virtual Vision Zero Central Florida Safety Speaker Series. MetroPlan Orlando is proud to be a partner with Bike Walk Central Florida and the Best Foot Forward program for this gathering. As the organization that's coordinating the Vision Zero region, we wanted to help bring a speaker for this event who could frame the safety challenges that we all face and offer us some inspiration for the work that we're all doing. I spent some time with Dr. Saunders this morning, got to know her a little bit, but after staff conversations with her in arranging this, they assured me that that we had found the right person to be here this morning. So I'm excited about that. So it is my honor today to introduce her. Dr. Rebecca Saunders is the founder and principal investigator at Safe Streets Research and Consulting. She has a 17-year career studying transportation safety, and her groundbreaking research has influenced national policy and design guidance. Her current research topics include pedestrian fatality hotspots, pedestrian safety at night, and safe practices for e-scooter use. They're all over the place. She has also led the conversation on such topics as bicyclists and drivers' roadway design preferences, and the relationship between cycling near misses, perceived safety, and crash experiences. She is the chair of the Transportation Research Board's Bicycle Transportation Committee and a member of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee for the city of Portland, Oregon, where she lives. Through all of her work, she blends national insights and local experience with expertise to help improve transportation safety for everyone. So join me in welcoming Dr. Sanders, please.
All right, oh yeah, okay, great. All right, so I was gonna bring up my clock so that I don't go over. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As Gary just introduced, I won't do the reintroduction, but I will say I'm just very happy to be here today. I'm gonna talk to you today about moving the needle on pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and also reflect back some of what I've learned about the incredible work y'all have already done and are doing to move the needle on pedestrian and bicyclist safety in Florida. So just to set the stage, to set the stage for via an agenda, we're going to do a little stage setting in the presentation as well. Then I'm going to talk about the importance of data. I'm a bit of a nerd. I do research for a living, and I think you all are probably a little bit as well, recognizing the importance of the data and what it can do to help us achieve our goals. And then I want to talk about the Safe System Pyramid. I don't know how many of you all in the room know about it, but it's a way of thinking about the safe system approach really through a public health lens. And so I want to talk about that and the potential that that has to help move pedestrian and bicyclist safety forward in Florida. And I want to actually pause there and say, everything I know about pedestrian and bicyclist safety actually also improves safety for motorcyclists and for drivers as well. And I think that it's really important for us to keep that in mind, that when we make a road safer for people walking and biking, it is automatically safer for drivers. We tend to sort of diminish driver safety on the roadway by using things like VMT to really lower the rate and not think about the fact that, okay, we have a certain number of deaths per million VMT, but every one of those deaths still affects a family, a community, in the same way that losing someone walking and biking does. So really, ideally, we're making improving safety for everyone, and then as Cheryl said, that's how we're gonna get to zero. And then I'll end on a couple of success stories. And then the last page will be some resources for you. So I don't need to spend a lot of time here, but why do we care about this in Florida aside from the fact that we care about lives? Well, Florida has tons of natural beauty, a flat topography, great weather for walking and biking. So in some ways, it should feel like a no-brainer that people would want to walk and bike here, right? But you've probably seen this figure or figures like it from the Dangerous by Design report. We consistently see Florida highlighted as a place with high crash risk. Sometimes it's in the top 5, sometimes it's number 1. And I know that these statistics can be painful to look at, particularly when we all care about this subject so much. So there's high crash risk, and there's the fact that people don't feel safe walking and biking. I think as humans, we have a pretty good gauge oftentimes of, our risk to ourselves. And so if you don't feel safe doing something and you have an alternative, we tend to choose that alternative. And the way that I see this happen, sort of most clearly in this country is with bicycling. So walking is the fundamental mode for humans, and walking could include using an ambulatory device like a wheelchair or a walker, right? But when we're, as humans, that's sort of like our basic mode of movement. So that's kind of the default mode, but bicycling isn't. And when we see a 1%, 2% bicycling mode share, it's because people opt out of that because they don't feel safe. The research is really, really clear about that. And that isn't the case in a lot of other places around the world where they've substantially invested in bicycling safety. Unfortunately, we can't opt out of walking, right? That even if you drive, you're walking somewhere to get to your car, and not everybody can drive and not everybody wants to drive. And I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on that, but That combination of high crash risk and low perceived safety and comfort means that Floridians aren't getting to take advantage of all of the benefits of walking and bicycling that they could, and I know that so many of you in this room want them to be able to do. And this is within a context, you've probably seen statistics like these as well, where we've seen traffic danger in the United States rise alarmingly since 2010. And I really should actually say traffic danger in the US in the title there, because this hasn't been mirrored around the world. So this isn't something that had to happen, and it's not something that has to continue to happen. This is based, this is a result of changes that we have not made, or decisions that we have made that have led to, greater danger. And, we've really seen this since that inflection point in 2010, which I now believe in hindsight was a false low, because the economy was crashing around 2008, 2009. And when VMT goes down, when the economy crashes, that has tended, asterisk COVID, has tended to lead to, fewer traffic deaths on the roadway. And then we introduced a lot of different factors, including smartphones and, the size of vehicles increasing. And so this is in a complex system with many changing factors. So when I'm asked, okay, what do we need to do to solve pedestrian safety? I say, well, how much time do you have? We have 13 to 20 factors, each with their own branches. And so this is not meant to be, the comprehensive be-all, end-all of figures, but it's just to show that there are these major categories, and each of these boxes has several boxes off of it, and then that box has several boxes, right? It's complex. And we can just take one or two of these as an example. So, we have... And just to say, all of these could have arrows to each of the others, right? So for a high-risk context, we have multiple parts of that. We've got multi-lane roadways, we've got higher speed roadways, we've got arterial roadways. So there are various aspects of high risk that matter. For risky driver behavior, are we talking about distraction? Are we talking about impairment from alcohol? Are we talking about impairment from drugs? Are we talking about polysubstance use, which is another box on there, substance abuse? Are we talking about reckless driving, which we've seen go up? Let's go to harmful vehicle design. Which part of that are we talking about? The fact that all of our vehicles are so much larger than they used to be, and that's just physics, that if you're hit by a larger object, everything else being equal, you're going to experience more damage, like some more force that's put into the human body that we haven't changed, evolutionarily to be able to sustain more force. Are we talking about the fact that those vehicles are taller and the hood is higher, and so someone's pushed down instead of flipped up onto the hood, and they're more likely to be run over? Are we talking about blind spots and the fact that, there are certain designs where people just can't see around them, or the car is so large that they can't have the full visibility? So I won't go through each of these, but just to say there are so many things going on that it makes sense that we haven't solved this, and that it's going to take an all hands on deck approach to get to where we want to go. And then there's COVID and culture. And the COVID pandemic really showed us that a lot of the things that we were doing were actually sort of taped together, not really as supportive as we wanted them to be. So we learned in COVID that traffic congestion is not actually an effective, sustainable traffic calming measure. When we had those roads that were built to accommodate tons of vehicle traffic, and then we emptied that traffic, those roads became speedways. And, I can attest to this in my own city of Portland. There are roads that show up every month when we meet for the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and we hear about where someone was killed in the last month. It's the same road over and over and over again, same roads. I also recognize this as, I grew up in Texas. That's where I learned to drive. And I am so thankful that I didn't do something stupid as a 16-year-old that would have changed my life and someone else's life forever, just by being on a roadway that looked like it was designed to go 50 miles an hour. It was signed at 25. And I was 16 or 17 or whatever, driving fast. And these kinds of we saw the results of that kind of design when we took the traffic congestion away. Enforcement is reactive, and I say that with no negativity at all. You are the last line of defense, right, in a system that isn't working. If we have to go out and we have to remind people and stop them and pull them over, something else broke further up the pathway. And now we have enforcement being, the last thing, basically, like what you all are doing, to try to get people to behave. And then enforcement got taken away in a lot of ways during the pandemic. And so we saw even that last line of defense, in a way, go away. And that has led to, or has contributed to, some of the traffic fatalities and degradation of traffic safety culture that we've seen. And then the last part is really about that traffic safety culture, that if our cultural norms are mirrored in our investments, in other words, the way that we have prioritized automobility throughout the South and the West in particular, basically any place in this country that developed after the car was developed, then we prioritized that. We built that in concrete, multi-lane, high-speed roadways, right? And we had this sort of like tacit agreement that we thought that people were, at least we were all on the same page and we were, more or less all following the same rules. And then COVID seems to have broken so much of the social contract we have with one another. I'm not making a political stance on COVID. What I am saying is that it's been very clear that traffic safety culture has degraded significantly in the last few years. And now we see things like people blowing through red lights or running stop signs in neighborhoods in ways that never happened before. And I don't have an answer for how to rebuild that traffic safety culture, but I'm hopeful that's something that we can be thinking about and talking about today as we're working together, because that is a critical part of getting us where we need to go. Part of it's going to take some real work to rebuild that. So we also have from the government, from the federal government, USDOT is actually trying to help us take a more proactive approach. So how many of you all have heard of the Safe System approach in here? Okay, a lot of hands, that's excellent. So the idea behind this is just that we need to have a well-rounded approach that contains that there are sort of 5 pillars and 6 principles. And so the principles are up there. I won't read all of them, but I do want to highlight that the first one is that death and serious injury is unacceptable. And so if we have that as our goal, we need to recognize several other aspects of that, including that humans make mistakes. And so we have to build a system that is more forgiving than not, that we're vulnerable. Go down through the list, the last one being that redundancy is critical. And that's so important to having, to recognizing that humans make mistakes and to having that outcome, achieving that outcome, that death and serious injury are no longer occurring on our roadways. So having a system with redundancy is really important. And the figure on the right shows the 5 pillars: safe roads, safe speed, safe vehicles, safe road users, and post-crash care. And these are all incredibly important, but this figure has truthfully bothered me since the very first time I saw it, because it sort of indicates to me that these are all sort of like coming at this at the same time and the same sort of magnitude, when really we know that some of these are more distal on the pathway and some of them are more proximal to the injury on the pathway. And so if we have a safe road that is self-enforcing, so people are driving this safe speed that we want them to on the roadway, then if someone is a road user that makes a mistake, it's less serious. The consequence is not as bad. The vehicle can be an old Chevy 75 or whatever that doesn't have any of the new bells and whistles. It doesn't have automatic emergency braking, but because we have a safe road and they're driving a safe speed, they can still stop in time to either fully prevent the crash or have the crash be less severe if it occurs. And then post-crash care ideally is a lot less important, not because it's not important when it happens, but because it doesn't need to happen as often. And that's one reason that I really like the Safe System Pyramid, is that it takes those pillars and kind of rearranges them and thinks about them differently through a public health lens. And the idea here is just that we have things that are effective at a population level and we have things that are effective at an individual level. And we want to build up the base of the pyramid, or the base of our approach to safety, focusing more on the population level factors, because that's where we can have the broadest impact. Every part of this is really important. And so in transportation, for example, we still have things at every level, including a lot of the work that you all do in this room. But our focus is more on the systemic, ideally, more on the systemic factors over time, so that we can do the zoning reforms that ultimately lead to fewer drivers on the roadway. And we've built a roadway environment that includes the sidewalks and the speed humps and narrow lanes or fewer lanes and protected crossings and bike lanes, so that people are driving more safely and people are behaving more safely at that level. And then we use signals to augment that. That's where this was the middle layer is called latent safety measures, including like leading pedestrian intervals or ISA. So some of those are in reaction to, okay, we built an environment that still isn't communicating exactly what we want. We need a leading pedestrian interval in there, right? But some of it is, okay, well, we have a roadway where we have signals, but we're going to actively manage our signal timing so that we achieve the speeds that we want in a way that otherwise might not occur. And then we have active safety measures, also important, but as you can see, we're getting more to the sort of more important to the individual level there. And, for pedestrians and bicyclists and drivers, this may be stop and yield signs, it may be bike helmets, right? But that's going to be more of an individual focus. And then the last part would be driver-focused campaigns. That would also, if the box were bigger, the triangle were bigger, it would include pedestrian-focused campaigns, bicyclist-focused campaigns. All of those are really important, but are much more individually focused. So all of these matter, but ideally as a society, we ultimately move toward putting more in at the population level so that we can have a bigger impact from our investments. Now I'm going to pause on the Safe System Pyramid for a minute and talk about the importance of data, and then we'll come back to the Safe System Pyramid. So this, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I love data because I really believe how it's so important for us to understand the problem. If we don't have the data, we can't identify the problem. And if we can't identify the problem, we can't identify the potential solutions that we need to try. And that identification of potential solutions is really important because then we can implement those solutions. And then we need more data because we need to be able to measure the impact of our investments. Did the solution accomplish what we wanted to? If not, then we adjust course if necessary, but we can't adjust course if we don't understand whether or not we were meeting our goals, right? If it does do what we want, that's amazing. We use the data to tell the story. And before I knew about you all, my favorite example of this was New York City's work with Jeanette Sadiq Khan, where she really did so much quick build, so much work to change things rapidly and gather data along the way to be able to tell the story, because people weren't necessarily happy about the changes that she was making. And it wasn't, of course, just her. She was leading it, right? It's a whole team of people, a whole department. But they were able to tell the story. Traffic crashes have gone down. Fatalities have gone down. We actually haven't lost, a ton of time with, all of a sudden, like the sort of nightmare of congestion that people always think is going to occur. Didn't occur. But you can't tell that story if you don't have the data. And this is actually one of Bike Walk Central Florida's graphics from the Best Foot Forward campaign, where you can really tell that story. Look at how that line has increased in terms of driver yielding over time at program sites. That's really amazing. And if you hadn't done the incredible work you've done to gather the data consistently over time, you wouldn't be able to tell this story as effectively. And thinking about using the data, I'm thinking about methods to identify the problems. So a little bit, again, of a broader focus here. I like to think about it in sort of two ways, macro level and micro level. And the macro level really allows us to focus on risk factors. So there are various ways to do this, including hotspot analysis, systemically oriented hotspot analysis, which is where we're actually looking not just at each spot, but we're looking at the characteristics of each spot and what's in common there so that we can start to be a little bit more proactive. Systemic crash analysis takes that a little further, and y'all are already doing this work through the work that I know Catherine is doing with Mike, and really trying to understand through a high injury network and crash analysis what are the problems that we're seeing in the area. And safety performance functions is sort of considered the gold standard there, but it's actually really resource intensive and complicated to do. And so a lot of what we're advising our clients to do now is actually, if you can do the systemic crash analysis, you're getting most of the benefit or almost all of the benefit of an SPF. But any of these, the point of them is to really help us understand what's going on. And so for pedestrian safety in darkness, for example, this is based on some of my research and research of colleagues, we then get a better understanding of what are the factors that are leading to pedestrian fatalities in darkness. So Gary mentioned that I did a study on pedestrian fatality hotspots, and then I'm leading the national research on pedestrian safety at night right now. And one of the things that we're finding very consistently is that whether it is a one person dying in a place or 2 to 3 people dying in a similar area, the factors are all very, very similar between those places. Higher speed locations, generally multiple lanes, generally higher roadway classification like an arterial. The exception here would be that we do sometimes see 2-lane high-speed roadways in more rural areas. And so that's, there's sort of like the urban-suburban problem, and then there's the rural problem. And then when we have those places, we don't put in sufficient countermeasures to counteract them when someone needs to cross the street. I've just talked earlier about larger vehicles, but we know that as larger vehicles permeate the fleet, they're going to become more problematic because that's what's more likely to hit you, because it's what's more likely to be on the roadway. And then dark conditions. And I like to call darkness the other impairment. So we don't talk about it, but none of us can see as well at night. Generally as a human species, we take in 90% of our information visually. And at night, we're essentially driving with a curtain around our eyes. And it's sort of astonishing to me that the transportation profession has kind of gone without really acknowledging that, other than headlights and cars. And we have street lights, but at a certain speed, you just don't take in the information. It's just so different from daylight. It can't be overstated. So it's just like this general impairment in which we're operating. Those factors all create risk. And again, that's all derived from crash analysis. And then there are factors that we know that expose people to risk. So a pedestrian attractor by itself, no problem. Grocery store, convenience store, liquor store, transit stop, all of those things, we want people to go to them. We build them so that people will come. But when we put those attractors in that high-risk context, that's where we're really seeing the problem. And that's actually what's like the sort of next level of understanding, for example, pedestrian serious and fatal injuries at night, is that those incidents are occurring disproportionately near grocery stores, convenience stores, liquor stores, places where people are walking to at night, and then they're doing that in a high-risk context. And this figure at the bottom is really just trying to show like sort of the magnitude of those factors that, you can't have a pedestrian fatality or a serious injury without someone being there, so pedestrian exposure is part of it. But it's really when you add that into that high-risk context, or it does happen that, if you have a speeding driver on an otherwise really lovely, 2-lane neighborhood, a risky driver behavior can blow it all up as well, right? And then if we have a combination of those things, then we're really in trouble. And that's why we have this much higher likelihood of tragedy and darkness for pedestrians. Then we go back to the micro level, and this is something that I think Best Foot Forward is doing so well, is really looking in to try to understand the behaviors that then inform the solution. So this is observations in person or in video, or we can do this through looking at conflict data. But really, we can understand crash types from a macro level analysis, but we're not going to get a lot deeper than that. So if we do that micro level work, that's where we start to understand, okay, well, the crash type is technically a driver turning right and hitting a pedestrian, but what's going on at the site? Was there a tree branch in front of a stop sign that somehow like people just didn't see? Is the signal out? Is this a location where, yes, technically the driver is supposed to do this, but actually the design is such that the driver is treating it like a slip turn and never even stopping. And we don't understand that from crash data in the same way that we can through the micro level. And, I think your work really speaks for itself with these statistics. I know we've got 3 counties represented here, but I know that my understanding is that this campaign is even spreading throughout Florida, which is amazing. Having done over 300 intersections over these last 13 years, and you have the data to show increased driver yielding at the program sites, reduced driver speeds, these things that we really want as a profession. And then you're not stopping there. And this is where, I have in the top right corner there, that I feel like you guys deal with really 4 of the 5, and maybe you could even correct me today and say all 5 of those levels of that safe system pyramid, because you're not stopping with the enforcement. You're using that data and those, your educational opportunities to go back and then recycle into the bottom layers of the pyramid so that you're ultimately affecting the built environment and you're making that change permanent through quick builds that may or may not eventually turn into concrete, but that actually change behavior in real time. And then the encouragement and education part. So, really trying to have effects at multiple levels here. So you're doing an amazing job. What are the tools that the rest of Florida can use, and how does the safe system pyramid apply to the rest of Florida? And then today, hopefully we can get into a discussion of, where does Best Foot Forward go from here? So to go back to the bottom of the pyramid and just to talk about the sort of broader Florida context for a minute, the bottom of that pyramid is the socioeconomic factors. And so here's where we're again talking about population level interventions, planning and zoning reform. And I will say, I am a bit of a reformed planner, if I can make that silly little pun there. Because, when I went into graduate school, I really, was sort of like, stick it to the engineers. I'm a transportation planner and I care about safety. And I married an engineer just so lots of love. But really, we loved to vilify the engineers in our classes. And what we didn't do was take a step back and think about how our metro level planning really supports a lot of those decisions that the engineers are making. And so I love that Metro Plan Orlando is sponsoring this and has been such a supporter of Best Foot Forward, because that tells me you all are thinking about that. But I'll never forget hearing one of the planners at Portland's Metro on a Vision Zero panel say, I care about Vision Zero and believe in it 100%, and then I go to work and I enforce congestion standards that basically force us to build the arterials where people are dying. And I don't know how to deal with that conflict. And he ultimately, for him personally, he actually left the job and went to work in a different capacity. But it was so telling to me that we've sort of let planning off the hook in that way, and we've tried to blame it all on the engineers. And I'm not here to say that the engineers don't have a role, but that we're working together, and it really is that, comprehensive approach that's going to be needed to get us to the safety results we need. It's unreasonable to expect the same levels of congestion movement or throughput at the same speeds. That's why arterials exist. So what do we need to do different? How do we need to think about that differently? And there are more micro ways to do this too, that we've got standards around safe routes to school, for example. We need standards around safe routes to transit. There should never be a transit stop that does not have a pedestrian crossing. And in fact, not just a pedestrian crossing, but like a fully loaded, high visibility with whatever is needed to get the person across the street safely. And yet we see that over and over again in this country, that transit stops are just sort of left on their own with no crosswalk. And it blows my mind. And it really does speak to, again, sort of how our investments mirror our norms and our values. So how do we change that? That's an area where socioeconomic factors are really can be in play. And I have the Live Local Act up here because I recently learned about this act, and it seems like there are parts of it that could be really beneficial, but if we don't match the land use, whatever happens, to the context, we're just taking people and kind of like back at that, to the graphic that I showed earlier, we're putting people in a dangerous context if we're not careful. So, thinking about how we do this at the population level is really important. And I think FDOT is actually doing a really good job in this area. I've heard, people from all over the country reference FDOT's context classification manual, like to try to move us in this direction. That, there are land uses and roadway types that fit together, and then there are those that don't. So how do we more intentionally plan our roadways to really mirror the land use that we expect? And context classification, I would say, is one of those that sort of bridges the bottom two layers of the pyramid. So now we're at the built environment, the sort of, the penultimate layer. And, here's where we have context classification with regard to roadway design. We also have comprehensive planning for people walking and bicycling. We have the systemic countermeasures, which in some ways would be, just not building a multi-lane roadway where we don't need one is in itself a countermeasure, right? Because we know that the more lanes there are, the more likely the driver is not to yield. And the more likely we're giving each other signals that like, oh, well, you're going, okay, I'm gonna go. And actually this looks like I can go a little faster because I know there's room for error because there's another lane. There's a lot of subconscious stuff that happens on a multi-lane roadway that doesn't happen on a two-lane roadway. And that's just because as humans, there's sort of a brilliance inherent in us that we adjust our behavior to the circumstance. Not, we do it subconsciously. The problem is that can end up having really harmful impacts on other folks, right? And then there's the retrofitted countermeasures part. And again, this is something that I think, you all are doing well. And I love that the city of Orlando has recently built a quick build guide. I'm such a fan of quick build because I think we get mired in process and literally in concrete, right? So many times we look at our streets and we think, what can we do here? It's just built out and we don't have the money to change it. And quick builds allow us to have a lot more flexibility and a lot shorter of a time frame to do things. And it doesn't have to be world-class facility, built with concrete. This picture is New York. Where they daylit a couple of intersections using very vibrant colored paint that I think would work very well in Florida. You could correct me if I'm wrong. And they've accomplished so many things through this. They shorten the distance that the pedestrian is exposed to traffic and crossing the roadway. They've created something that's really fun to look at, actually. They daylit the intersections, and they also really dramatically changed the turning radius so that the driver has to slow down. And this is something that, would have cost so much more and been so much more involved to have done. done in concrete that they did really quickly and effectively. And it's been a key measure in then a lot of the success stories that we hear about people reducing traffic fatalities is this sort of this quick build project, but also specifically daylighting, changing the radii, shortening the crosswalk distances, that kind of thing. And I won't go into this much, but I do want to point out a resource that I recently worked on that is in the NCHRP, the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, roadway reallocation guidance. And actually some folks from Florida were on our team. And the point of this was to try to get folks to think differently about when we, what our goals are for roadways and how to incorporate those goals more holistically into our planning process. So I encourage you to look at that. It has a lot of information about equity, economy, the environment, and safety, and how various countermeasures help us work toward and maybe work against some of those goals, and really providing a framework for including that in our roadway planning. Another resource I want to just point out is the Safe System Roadway Design Hierarchy. So this is a recent resource from FHWA that takes the FHWA proven safety countermeasures. So I don't know if you know that FHWA has a whole page about all of the proven safety countermeasures that they highly recommend. And this takes them and actually uses that safe system pyramid that I've been talking about and helps kind of think through where they would be effective on that pyramid. So I wanted to just mention those two resources in this area. Then we move to latent safety measures. And we've got, this is where we've got, again, the signals that are kind of coming in either to kind of retrofit an area that maybe, or a roadway that we built sort of too wide, or we did something with it. If we could go back and start from scratch, we might do differently. And I think this is a type of measure, the latent safety measure, that's really important for areas like Central Florida, but let's be honest, basically most of the U.S., where we've built roadways that are very hard to go back and fully retrofit. We can use signals much more creatively than we have. So a current signalization strategy that's we're exploring in Portland, that I know the Los Angeles DOT has used, is called Rest on Red. And that's where you have embedded loops in the pavement. The signals are always red from every direction. And then someone's approaching, and if they're approaching at a speed that is safe for the roadway, the signal turns green and they can proceed. And if they're not, the signal stays red and they have to stop. And then the signal will turn green and they'll go. And so it's a different kind of traffic calming strategy. You can also use signals for slowed progression, really trying to time folks. So in downtown Portland, for example, the signals are timed at 11 miles an hour. So if you want to hit all greens, you just go 11 miles an hour, no problem. So we've got that, we've got leading pedestrian intervals, and then we have another part of this category that's actually like management within the car itself. So speed governors and intelligent speed assistance. And I know we're not there politically for a lot of the country, maybe all of the US at this point. But I will say that where they're trying this at a pilot level, like the New York's municipal fleet, they are seeing real results. And I think there's energy here that's bubbling up, particularly among teen drivers, with parents knowing that their kids, their brains aren't fully developed. They aren't capable of making the same decisions adults are, and we'll leave aside, poor decisions that adults make for a minute there. There's potential that this could actually become much more normalized, and then it sort of takes the burden off. So we have a system that's not perfect, but this is back to that sort of safe system approach. We've got redundancy, and in this case, the car is helping us to do the things we needed to do. I know I need to wrap up soon, so I'll try to go quickly through the last couple. We've got active measures. We've already talked about some of these, but this is, again, an area where you all are doing work. And I will say, I do really believe this part and then education are really important, because in our current system, we don't have all of the redundancy that we need. So this is providing really critical redundancy until we can go back, and it's going to take a long time, right? To, even if we quick build all of it, it's going to take a long time to fix the system, and it's going to be a while before we get the cars and the intelligent speed assistance and all of those things that we need. So continuing to do this work, and then y'all spreading the word, spreading your example around, I think is how Florida will get to target zero. It's really an all hands on deck part. And I want to come back just for a minute to the traffic safety culture part. I said earlier, I don't have an answer about that, but I hope that we're thinking about how all of these things sorry, I was trying to go backwards there, can work into reforming and recreating a traffic safety culture that really fully supports reaching a vision of zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries. And I'll end on just a couple of positive examples. So this is titled Insights from Australasia. So the FHWA recently did a study tour of pedestrian safety along our arterials in Australia and New Zealand. And they chose those countries because they knew that it was really important for us to not, to have examples from other auto-dominated areas where we're not talking about, medieval Europe that was transformed, and then they can do a lot of things that we can't do realistically here in the same way. What you see in this figure is that starting from the year 2000, our pedestrian fatalities have increased by about 170%, and theirs have decreased, even though they've had some bumps along the way. There's a clear downward slope overall of the line to where Australia is at about 80% of their fatalities, and New Zealand is closer to 70%. So they have made a dedicated effort over the last 20 years, and they have achieved very different results, even facing some of the same things that we're facing, right? Like smartphones aren't an American problem, but they seem to have had more of an effect here because of the way we've built our roadways and the system we've designed. And this, you're not meant to have to digest all of this. This is a figure from the report, which you can download from FHWA. But the point of this figure, and the most insightful comment that I took away from the presentation I saw about this, is that they don't have any tools that we don't already have. We don't have to invent new things, but the difference is that when they are looking at safety now, they're throwing everything at it. Every single safety project is a kitchen sink approach, whereas we have tended to try to do things in sort of like a more isolated way. Well, let's try this for this, or we'll do a road safety audit after a project has been built. They do road safety audits 3 times in projects. They do them in the beginning with the plan. They do it in the middle as they're implementing the plan to see, is this getting us what we want? And then they do it after it's built. They have a movement in place framework, which is similar to FDOT's context classification, where they really try intentionally to match the context and the roadway design. And then they very aggressively use speed management. They do use automated enforcement, and I understand that that's something that is being worked on in Florida. They use intelligent speed assistance. So that kitchen sink approach has allowed them to have that very different trend line than what we've seen. And lastly, there are a couple of examples in the United States. Hoboken, New Jersey has had 0 fatalities for the last 7 years, which is amazing, and they've done it piecemeal, but by having that buy-in politically, by making, like, this is the graphic from 2023 alone, right? In 2023 alone, we daylighted 78 intersections and put in 61 high visibility crosswalks, and they have these statistics, and they really have had an incredible record to show from it. Fremont, California, hasn't had quite the success, but has had relatively a lot of success compared to the rest of the United States. And a big part of their approach is that they're very data-driven, as you can see from this figure here on the right, doing a lot of the things that we've already talked about today, looking at safety in different ways, and really then taking that information and having it inform their approach. And the things that they're doing on the ground are not different than things that y'all are doing here. High visibility crosswalks with signs. They've got speed feedback signs where it's really necessary. Like in the figure in the middle, they do actually use concrete occasionally, right? So that's actually a fully rebuilt protected intersection. But their focus has been on low-cost systemic countermeasures to really change the traffic safety culture and results there. The last figure there is showing that they just changed intersection lighting from the sodium to the LED, and it made a huge difference in terms of the actual visibility of the intersection. So the last thing is resources. And this is just a list here, and I know that Anna's going to send out a PDF, so I won't go through all of these, but I want to bring your attention to a couple of them. The second bullet is the FHWA Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian, and that is reflected in the chart on the right. And if you haven't seen that, it's a way that it's a guidebook that allows us to go in and with your speed and your volume and your roadway design, choose from a selection of countermeasures. And that work is based on that first bullet, the 2005 Charlie Zagier marked crosswalk study, which is a landmark study, and it's really just amazing. And I encourage you to look at those. And then I want to mention NCHRP 926. The title was too long for me to put on there, but that's guidance to improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety at intersections. I worked on that project with a lot of incredible folks around the country, and it's a comprehensive, there's a comprehensive countermeasure glossary. We have several tables in there to really help you dial in to the countermeasure that meets your need. So I know I've taken a little bit more time than intended, but I wanted to just end there and thank you very very much for your time and attention.
So we are going to be bringing up a panel discussion in just a sec, but I want to give you guys an opportunity before we bring them up to ask any questions of Rebecca. She'll also be on the panel, so if you want to think about it for a little while, that's okay too. But if there's any like right off the bat you guys wanted to ask, I want to give you the opportunity here to do that.
Yes.
Signal spacing. You mentioned that downtown Portland has their signals timed at 11 miles per hour. Is there a minimum signal spacing in order to make that work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there would probably be a maximum signal spacing. Yeah. So, I mean, we have 200-foot blocks down there, so that works very, very well. I can, I don't know the answer to that, and we could ask some engineers. I honestly don't know how, if it's been looked at in that exact way, but you can imagine that a signal more than 3 blocks probably, if you can't see the signal, you're not going to have that same, the way that it works is you want to sort of like that green, you want to time yourself to get to it, right? If you can't see the signal, then it's going to be less effective. So along our major arterial signal progression is probably going to be a little bit of a harder sell. It would probably take more education to let people know, hey, this is the speed and you'll catch all the greens if you go this speed. Where you have signals closer together, I think it's going to be more effective. And I would imagine that would still apply then to your more urban areas. Yeah.
Take another question. All right, well, perfect. We'll keep thinking about those because we're going to bring the panel up. So, Rebecca, if you want to take that first chair on the end there,
Yeah.
So she'll be part of this panel as well. I want to introduce our panel here today. So, in the seats over here, we're going to have Corey Anthony, Corporal Corey Anthony from the Kissimmee Police Department, representing enforcement. Also on this side, Tanya Wilder cannot be here today, but luckily we have Laura Hardwick here to speak for City of Orlando. You'll be on this side as well. Laureen Bobo is here from the Florida Department of Transportation to talk about education, the Target Zero efforts. You'll also be on this side. And then for evaluation, we have Mike Wilson from Metro Plan Orlando. So the idea here is we have a regional perspective here, Central Florida, with Mike. We also will have a small city perspective, a large city perspective, and then a statewide perspective. So I'm going to start off by asking a question of each panelist here. And then I want you guys to be thinking of questions that you might want to ask as well. And we'll kind of open it up for a more general discussion. So I'll start on my right here. Mike, welcome. Thank you for being here today. So Rebecca talked a little bit about context classification and land use. The built environment was kind of toward the base of the pyramid, affecting a large amount of people at once. So I wanted to ask from the perspective of the region, from Metro Plan, when you guys take into account how roads are being built, where they're being built, the context of the land use. What role does Metro Plan play in that currently, and what role do you foresee Metro Plan playing in the future?
Well, as a regional planning agency, we don't have control over land use, so we can't really implement any changes that are meaningful in that respect. But we can keep track of what's happening. We can know what's going to be, what the locals are doing in the future, and then hopefully tie our corridor plans to facilitate that. And also when we're looking at safety, we're already doing this as part of Vision Zero, is we're looking at corridors that have the same type of context of other corridors that have a real high crash problem, and saying, even though this corridor over here doesn't have a high crash problem, we still want to address it in the same way that we would because of that context and because of that potential for more crashes.
Great. And on that same note, you guys have been leading the Vision Zero effort, trying to make sure that we get communities together talking about how we reduce down to zero traffic fatalities. Do you want to talk a little bit just about the Vision Zero impact and kind of how that's going this year as we get started with that?
Well, it's a big effort. We're not only doing a regional plan, but we're doing plans for all 3 of our counties and all the municipalities in them as well, except for the city of Orlando, who they already have their Vision Zero plan, but they are still an active partner in that. And so by the end of this spring, early summer, everybody will have an adopted plan with high injury networks identified, and with at least the starting point for here's what the high injury networks corridors are and what we think the most likely countermeasures are going to be. And then moving forward is how do we turn those into real projects that make the change we need to see on the road.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Corporal Anthony, thank you for being here today. So Rebecca briefly touched on some of the advances in technology. She mentioned LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals, an engineering advancement that allows the pedestrian to get a head start before the traffic light changes. You guys know that we're also seeing advancements. Everybody's got their phones all the time. So whereas passing out individual leaflets of information, now we can reach people right at their phones through social media and other campaigns. On the enforcement side, one of the advances that's happening is that they're getting better at being able to identify and ticket drivers that aren't stopping for pedestrians and cyclists. So I wanted to ask Corporal Anthony, what value do you see from kind of that human-to-human enforcement, and do you feel like there's an added value to doing that person to person versus moving toward a more solely digital based system of enforcement?
Yes, I think technology plays a huge role in enforcement. I mean, things such as like red light cameras, the cameras that are now coming out on bus stops, or school buses and things like that. But I don't think anything will ever replace that face-to-face interaction that people have on traffic stops. A lot of times when we pull people over, they're just simply not aware. And if they receive a red light camera ticket in the mail or something like that, they may have no idea exactly when the violation occurred or, things like that. But I think it's the face-to-face interaction that truly can educate people. A lot of times people will always remember when they got pulled over by law enforcement. And if they did receive a ticket, or even if it's just a warning, that's ultimately is what's going to curb the behavior, is that one-on-one education.
Great, yeah, and you guys always bring out a nice big team. City of Kissimmee usually has like at least 10 officers, 15, which is pretty rare to see from a small city having that much involvement in these traffic enforcements. So I just wanted to ask kind of casually, what does the City of Kissimmee do to kind of bolster support for these high visibility enforcements, and how do you garner so much turnout and buy-in from your staff?
So our unit, the traffic enforcement unit, has regular meetings with the patrol officers, and we do a lot of education with them when it comes to traffic enforcement. It creates a lot of buy-in with them, and we regularly have between about 45 and 50 stops at each location that we do when we have the Best Foot Forward campaign. So there's no way that my unit, having only 6 people, could be able to do it all. So we ask for volunteers. A lot of times it's people that are wanting to come to our unit and want to work in the traffic enforcement side of things. And going forward, the goal is going to be try to incorporate the different agencies within my county working together as well. So therefore, we're going to have that many more in order to increase the education.
Thank you so much. Laura, so from the large city perspective, Rebecca talked a little bit about quick build guides, and we know that last summer, City of Orlando was able to issue their official quick build guide. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that project and what types of projects that you are implementing or that you plan to implement with that guide.
Yeah, so it's actually been about 2 years now since our first foray into quick build. That started with a pop-up project, just a one-day demonstration that we then repeated and then graduated into our Corinne Drive pilot path. So that's one that you've seen on the streets in Orlando. Some other ones that we recently did this since January is we're diving into intersection murals. There's a fantastic Bloomberg report that came out that showed the safety benefits of asphalt art, that they can reduce bike ped crashes by 50%. So we have 4 intersection murals along Orange Avenue, downtown Orlando, and those will be followed by artistic crosswalks and artistic curb extensions, kind of like not as large as the New York City one we saw in her presentation. And that's great because the new MUTCD actually has some guidance on how to do these. So we were definitely charting a course with our quick build guide that is now backed up by MUTCD guidance for asphalt art. And then there will be more because we were awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. So I would say we have about 5 or 6 quick builds right now, but that grant will fund 28 quick builds throughout the city of Orlando that will be focused on informing a pedestrian plan for the city.
That's great. And so for some of our engineering partners that are here today, either from various counties or small cities, they might be interested in getting more involved in this idea of quick build projects. Where do you suggest that they start in terms of like what they could start implementing right away?
Well, chances are they probably already have. The Quick Build Guide was a way for us to really map out the process of ways that the city of Orlando was already trying to think creatively about problems. There are some curb extensions that were put in around Lake Highland there and on Michigan at one of our Best Foot Forward crosswalks. So I would start with where you're already at. You might be doing this and sort of map out that process. And then, of course, now that there's some guidance in the MUTCD, you could start with that as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And Laureen. So Lorraine's here to talk about education. In just a little bit, we'll be doing some breakout sessions talking about educational messaging. And so we wanted to have FDOT here to give their perspective, especially with this Target Zero campaign, kind of revamping their messaging. So Laureen, my question to you would be, when Rebecca was talking about education, you saw that it was kind of at the top of that pyramid, right? So at the base of the pyramid is things that kind of affect the masses, such as land use, socioeconomic factors. But education mostly is reaching individuals at a time. So from FDOT's perspective, what plan do you guys have to reach kind of the most individuals so that we can get kind of the same impact as the base of the pyramid while still reaching individuals where they're at?
Very good. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And as I was preparing for today, I wanted to look at the data. I wanted to see, are we making an impact, yet? So from 2022 to 2023, unfortunately, fortunately, our overall fatalities have gone down. That's both in District 5 and in the Metro Plan Orlando area. Unfortunately, our pedestrian and bicycle fatalities have gone up, which means our percentage has increased. So from a district-wide standpoint, it went from 25% to 28%. In the Metro Plan Orlando area, it went from 30 to 38%. So that can be very discouraging, So we take that data and we say, we need to keep doing the things that we're doing, but clearly we need to do more. We need to do it a little bit differently than we have done it before. I see a lot of friendly faces in the room that were able to participate in our workshops a few months ago to help develop our safety strategic plan. You guys are one of the first to learn that we're having a Central Florida Safety Summit to unveil that plan on May 17th. It's a Friday. Everybody is invited. And that will be all 9 counties coming together and understanding what came out of this plan. So many of the things that we learned from talking to over 400 individuals over that effort was, how do we get to the people? How do we get to our neighbors? How do we get to that car that we don't even know the person next to us, but we want them to get home? We really believe that if we can get down to that personal nature, you don't need to work in this industry to have a positive impact on the roadway. But I don't think most people think in that way. They're just getting to where they need to go, and maybe they're just caring about themselves. But if they're doing safe things, maybe the person behind them will, you're setting that example. I think Commissioner Uribe says that I like to say that I'm a pace car, and I am. When I'm on I-4, I'm gonna be in that right lane going the speed limit. People are passing me crazy around me, but gosh darn it, I'm gonna do everything that I can do to get home. My son has a baseball game tonight, and I'm going to that game, whether, based on my actions and hopefully the actions of people around me. So how do we get that message out? That's one thing to, just talk about it, but how do we get to all of those people? So we like to go to where people are. Going to an art festival. This season, we are sponsors of the Daytona Tortugas game. Next Friday, April 12th, is Transportation Safety Night at the Daytona Tortugas game. It's one of their promotional nights. We're going to reach a lot of people that night. And why are we partially there? Well, one, they're the only minor league baseball team around in Central Florida. But also, you saw the map earlier, #1 in the country for bicycle and pedestrian deaths. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about how folks at that game can make a positive impact, whether they're biking or walking and making smart choices, or if they're driving and making sure that all those people walking and biking get home. So we're really excited about a lot of these different efforts. We also believe you can't start young enough. My boys, that car does not move if their seatbelts are not on, and they will remind me. If I even look at my phone because I just got a text in, they'll tell me, Mom, you need to drive, right? How do we get to every kid? How do we get to everybody, call your parents out in the car? Many of you have heard me tell this story before, but I play a game in the car with my boys. They're 10 and 12 now, but we've started this many years ago. We look for people walking and biking. And if you're the first one that sees them, you get a point. My 12-year-old's very competitive, so he needed a way to get more points. So if we see somebody walking or biking, and they're maybe not making the smartest choices, maybe it's dark out and they have no lights on, they're wearing dark clothes, or they're riding their bicycle and they don't have a helmet, or they're crossing and there's a crosswalk right there, but they didn't get all the way to it, you get 2 points. So, on the front, it's just a fun game for us to play in the car. But really what they're doing is they're looking for those people walking and biking. And I'm hoping that in a few years when they're driving, which scares me, when they're driving, that it's just inherent that they're looking for those people walking and biking. And it's not just a game, it's just what they do. So how do we get that type of thing out to all, so everybody growing up knew Punch Bug game, right? How do we get that game out there to look for people walking and biking? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laureen. So we have these 5 individuals that we're very excited about to have up here on stage. We're going to open it up now to the general public for some questions. So if you have a question, if you can just raise your hand, we'll make sure we get a mic to you as well. No, we'll just have you talk out and I'll repeat it. It's no big deal. Yeah, up front here, go ahead.
I'm so loud, we don't need Thank you so much. I appreciate the level of expertise and the thoughtfulness of the approach. I have another question really about technology. It's a different approach. I know for enforcement it's so important, and I think for people who are commuting from around Central Florida, first thing we do is we pop in the address and we see what comes up on the GPS. What I hear from residents is they live in residential areas that were really created for walkable, bikeable, potentially can have good safety features, but now they're popping up on somebody else's GPS as the fastest access point from A to B, which means that whoever's driving through there potentially missed out on every educational opportunity, every improvement, every neighborhood meeting, every pace car. And how do we get, sort of pinned down on that piece of technology, knowing it's just doing an algorithm?
Just to the open general, anybody can answer that? Yeah. Yeah, Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, in 2020, is this? Yeah. The city of Orlando actually did a study with the Safe Routes Partnership on this exact phenomenon. We didn't get to the results we really wanted because those Waze and the technology companies are very protective of their data. They want to be able to make money off of it. But the one thing we did learn is that if we continue to do traffic calming in our neighborhood streets, speed humps, speed pillows, diverters, there's a whole section to our quick build guide of just quick build traffic calming, that it will disincentivize that cut through traffic. They will say, you know what, it's actually a better bet for me to go on Edgewater than to cut through this neighborhood here. And that will factor into those navigation apps as well, that you're not gonna be able to save any time on that. So that's one approach we have for that, is to do traffic calming on those neighborhood streets.
Perfect. Anyone else want to chime in?
For us, we make a huge push to make sure our officers are doing enforcement off of the major roadways. We have US 192, John Young, stuff like that runs through our city. But our biggest push are those small neighborhoods. And a lot of times when we're out there doing enforcement, I'll pull up Waze or something like that, and once I see that little icon of the police officer there, I realize that we're making a difference and everybody else will too. So for us, our big push are the ones that are cutting through the neighborhoods.
Excellent. Yep.
We, a couple years ago, we did a speed management study at MetroPlan, and while we were focused on the, arterials and collectors, what we were doing is we were pulling WEJO data, which is connected vehicle data, that gave us their actual operating speeds, and then we could see how that differed from the posted speed. I think there might be an application where we can identify some of those local streets where we might be seeing, probably need a little more data than we had, where we can see not so much the volume, but do we have a speeding problem on a local street, and we can really document that and then help the locals to identify countermeasures.
Perfect. Anybody else? All right, I'll take another question. Yep, so we'll come with a mic over here. Perfect.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I truly believe that one of the issues that is we're facing right now is the use of the cell phone. You're on your cell phone, whether you're walking as a pedestrian, you see the light, okay, it's green, I go. You don't even look to see if there is a car. And the same thing happens when you're driving. You're driving and, okay, I'm turning here, so you're distracted. I am surprised to see that in Europe, you cannot use your telephone when you're driving. And I'm surprised that we haven't done anything, at least in Florida, to prohibit the cell phone when you're driving. Are there any efforts at any level being done so that this can happen? I truly believe that that will lower, the amount of crashes that we're seeing.
Yeah, of course. And we actually had this same topic come up recently at the Marion County TPO board meeting, saying the same thing, that they feel like something needs to be done about these cell phones that drivers have in their hands, that pedestrians have in their hands. And what do we do about that? So who would like to speak on behalf of that? Yeah, that'd be great.
How about now? There we go. All right. My understanding is that this last legislative session, there was a push for a completely hands-free, because you can't text, but, officer, I wasn't texting. I was doing this other thing, that was equally as distracting, but not against the law. There was a big effort. It did not pass. So my personal suggestion to everybody is, let your legislatures know that you support hands-free, right? Because it's a bigger effort. We can get there. There are other states that have done it, but it takes, I feel like, a lot of those grassroots efforts and hearing it from all of these different angles. I don't know the reasons why it didn't pass. I think to all of us in the room, it's like, why wouldn't you, do something like that? Unfortunately, a lot of bills don't pass because it's the right thing to do. So keep pushing on those efforts, because I believe it's very important as well.
Yeah. Anyone else want to touch on hands-free use?
I'll just say
go ahead.
quickly, so there are two parts of this. So first, there's the political aspect of it that Lorene's just talked about. And any time that we can do something in a bipartisan way, I think it's going to be more effective. So yes, absolutely to talking to our legislators, but there are places that have those laws in the United States, and it's not clear that those laws have made a ton of difference. And I think some of that just gets back to the idea of it's actually, at times it's hard to enforce. And if someone's lying, if someone lies to the police officer and then, if they are caught and then they lie, our hands are sort of tied from that area. So this is where I actually think that we need, from the larger level, the auto manufacturers to be more of part of this. So some of my work at the national level is I'm on a National Safety Commission, a National Safety Council focus group for safe vehicles, and we have some representatives from the auto manufacturers there, and we're trying to have conversations with them about the need for them to be more proactive. And so this is a sticky part. I don't have an answer that's very clear, but this is where NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, really needs to be doing more. So to the degree that, we can, particularly through our DOTs, but also through local agencies, kind of work to build that coalition for that pressure as well. I think that's where we're going to need it to come in, because it's again back to sort of what Vince was saying, like, do we do it at the population level such that, it's built into vehicles that there's actually your cell phone is, in a way disabled, or do we try to do it on an individual by individual basis, which is just so hard. There are, over 300 million of us, right? So it's not to say that the enforcement part isn't important. That's back to like the enforcement being kind of the last line of defense. It's really important, but recognizing that enforcement can't be everywhere all the time. We need that to be built into the system. And, the phone manufacturers are part of this too. And even to go back to your question about tech, it does anger me that they're sort of like, it's not our like, we just built the algorithm, don't look at us. Like, no, you do have a role to play here. And I think right now, I think in a lot of areas, we're still struggling with how to hold those very powerful corporations, quite frankly, accountable for individual results. If you have, there are some Families for Safe Streets chapters around the country. Do you have one here?
Do we?
We would like to start one. If anyone wants to start an initiative to start a chapter.
I have seen them be among the most powerful advocates. It is very, very hard to sit next to. I sat next to Amy Cohen, who founded New York City's Safe Streets for Families for Safe Streets. She was a co-founder in a conference last year, and I had to speak after her, weeping the whole time she talked, because if you've lost someone, I have lost people in my life, but no one to traffic violence. But you can't overstate the devastation. And so those groups of people, if they're willing, that's a big emotional ask, but if they are willing to be part of a coalition, I think that's a really, really important and powerful voice. And that I've seen that move things in a way that, they haven't been able to move in the past. So I wish I had a clearer answer, but you're talking about really important things. How do we get these actors who are really kind of far away and very powerful and very rich and can fight a lot of, legislation, get them, and that's, are there any lawyers in the room? Like sometimes a court case, is actually really helpful for that too. It's something we need to work on in closing,
Excellent. And Corporal Anthony, I'd be interested to hear kind of your perspective on the enforceability of hands-free laws.
Well, currently the only real hands-free ones we have are through school zones. You're not allowed to have any technology or anything like that through school zones. And through my work as a traffic homicide investigator, just about every case that we work now, if there's any type of suspicion of distracted driving, we are getting cell phone records and stuff like that to try to either prove or disprove if it leads to a traffic fatality.
Excellent. Take another question. Yep, go ahead, Kelly. We got, yep, Anna.
Good morning. So I think this question's probably for Lorene, but Mike might have some input on it too. So Dr. Sanders, in your pyramid, I really appreciate the land use being in the base of it. I will take that back to our community development department. And you showed this slide that sort of lauded the land use context classification that FDOT established a few years ago. In our Vision Zero planning activities, I would venture to say many, of course, the deadliest roads are the state roads. In many cases, the context is the C3C or the C3R. So, and a lot of cities I know will try to argue, we really want to be that C4, it's sort of that aspirational land use. And the reason, or one of the reasons for that, is because the toolkit for speed reduction in the C4 and better land use is so much better. So it sometimes feels like the C3 land use becomes an excuse for not being able to make significant improvements in those contacts, and they turn out to be our deadliest contacts. So is DOT working on improving techniques in that context, taking a look at what else can we do, because those are our deadliest roads?
No, that's a very good point, Kelly. Personally, I haven't necessarily been involved in those types of discussions, but I will definitely be bringing that back. As you're aware, we do try to put as much as we can into our projects, those resurfacing projects. Hey, we're going to already be there. What can we do? Funding is a very, very big hurdle, especially we cover 9 counties and thousands of miles of roadway, and we just can't do all the things that we would like to do. We are trying to figure out better ways, more ways to be able to fund those things. If it does become a pop pavement-only project, can we do goes with? Can we put that mid-block crossing in? You know, a narrower lane is simply striping here versus here. You know, like there are some very cost-feasible ways to try to start slowing that traffic down if we can't throw everything at it. So I'll bring that back to see if we are doing some more things in those categories. So.
Excellent. Anybody else? Okay, cool.
Well, actually, Vince, could I just say
That'd be great, yeah.
thank you for
Thank you.
asking that, Kelly. You give me a high injury network and I can point out, or you give me a city map and I can point out your high injury network if I know where the state routes are. And that is an unfortunate and extremely consistent reality. So I've been doing Vision Zero projects since they came out, and it's just been the same. And it is really frustrating, particularly for the city. So I didn't talk about Jersey City, but Jersey City also has achieved 0 deaths on its roadways, but not on the state roadways in the city. And so that's really frustrating, right? That you're like, I don't have control over this. And in Portland, absolutely, the most dangerous roads are the state roads or the former state roads. And, you know, I think this gets back to some of the safety culture that I was talking about earlier, that it's not just safety culture among the population in general. It has to be safety culture embedded within our organizations that have some control as well. And, you know, it's going to take, that culture is hard to change and it takes time, but there has to eventually be a recognition that we don't all get to go as fast as we want to go, because that is what otherwise, you know, that is how people don't get home safely to their families. And when we did the pedestrian fatality hotspot study with Dr. Bob Schneider, y'all may, some of you may have heard of his name. He's a close colleague of mine, works for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he led that study, and there was a big write-up in Vox, and we were interviewed, and because the roadway with the most pedestrian fatalities over time is in Florida, right? And so thinking about that and not letting that go without, you know, understanding that funding is a constraint, and you know, there are some real constraints. It's hard for me sometimes to hear that, though, and this, Lorraine, isn't personal at all, because I got to talk to you and I know your heart about this, but in Oregon, I'll just say the DOT is like, we don't have funding for this, and then they want to expand another roadway. And I think that can be frustrating too. So, you know, really continuing to work on how we, you know, change that part as well. Why are we expanding roadways in one area and then saying we don't have safety improvements for another? There is some value shifting that still needs to occur. And I think we have to be honest about that, even though that's challenging.
A number of you have probably seen my Guess the Posted Speed quiz that I did at a number of committee and board meetings. And it came out of my travels around the country, for those who haven't seen it, where I'd be on a road in a car and seeing a posted speed of 30 or 35 miles an hour and thinking, if this exact road was back in Florida, it would be 40 or 45. And you know, I've struggled with, well, why is that? We're all using the same 85th percentile speed process, and you know, or at least had been until the newer target speed process. And so why do we see different results in different parts of the country? And so it tells me that, culture does matter, and how do we change that? And so that we shouldn't let context class be, as you were saying, be an excuse for this is just the appropriate speed for these conditions. Because in other parts of the country, people are driving slower.
Great. And just for the panel, any final thoughts kind of as we finish up here? Anything been brewing in your head that you wanted to say before we wrap up the panel discussion?
Let me see. Okay. To that conversation, I think we're at that transition point where when it comes to our manuals are starting to get updated to allow us for proactive target speeds and all of that. But our projects are still going on a basis of this is how you speed a road. Luckily, US Limits is a new resource for people to determine the speed limit of a road. Lots of cities on I would say lower speed, like 35 to 25, have piloted just reposting the speed and seeing reductions in speeds. And then on our Corinne Drive quick build path, just the addition of bike ped safety features has brought the operating speeds down. So we could almost even start the conversation at the root of, I love that NCHRP report you shared in your presentation. It's one of my favorites of, are we providing the minimum safety needed for all modes? And if we're doing that, we're gonna get towards lower speeds just by what we've seen in our quick build projects.
That's great. Any other final thoughts?
I guess I would just say, based on what Mike said, that I think, Mike, that was a perfect example of how things can change. Everything we're seeing is a result of choices we've made, and we get to make different choices. And that's really exciting and empowering, even though I'm not naive enough to think that's easy. It's also, it is empowering. We made these choices and we can make different choices, and we have the tools. That was, again, the most encouraging thing for me about that Australasia study, is that it's not like they are way smarter than we are or came up with something that we'd never thought of. It's just that they use all the tools together. And so we can do this. It's a long road, no pun intended, but we can do it. And that feels really important because this work can feel, it can feel hard to look at fatality statistics or even severe injuries and kind of, how is this ever going to change? Because it's felt so consistent. It's important to have that hope, I think.
Great. That's a great way to end this. So thank you so much to our panelists for being up here today. You guys can go ahead and sit back down. Thank you so much. I'll take the mics.